Good evening and welcome to tonight's Thursday, February 5th work session between the City Council and the School Board, joint work session. I don't know if I recall us ever having as many folks here in one place from the School Department, School Board, and City Council, so very excited about the collaboration starting certainly earlier than it was last year, and to come to solutions as we're all facing pretty significant challenges, but nothing that can't be overcome by being reasonable and working together. So I'm excited that we have new Chair Lisa Rappaport, and I just want to thank everybody for the dialogue that we're about to have. And I'll pass it over to the City Manager. Actually, before I do that, Chair Rappaport, anything you would like to say before?
We are also quite appreciative of the opportunity to have the conversation. I think we serve our city and our kids really well when we're all on the same page about what's best for students and what's best for the community. So we're looking forward to the conversation. I appreciate it.
Indeed. All right, City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, School Board Chair. We're pleased to be here tonight as a group. We game planned this conversation to a certain extent, but we also know that there will be a whole lot we didn't plan for. So we're looking forward to the conversation. This, as you will recall, stemmed from a request from Councillor Cook to bring these groups together to try and understand better how the capital planning process works and to take conversations about facilities and grounds and schools further together. So with that, I'm going to start with Dr. McLaughlin. I'm going to start our presentation.
Great. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Councilors, School Board members, and City Manager. Thanks to everybody for being here and taking the time to do this all together. I want to start by framing our presentation tonight. Our goal is to discuss our process. It's an opportunity to give you insight, not just into the next 5 or 6 years that are visible in the capital improvement plan, but how we think beyond the horizon, how we come to conclusions, how we plan multiple years out, how we try to be stewards of very expensive public assets responsibly over time. Our understanding, based on prior conversations, is that part of the reason for this meeting is a sense of surprise about the expansion of what we propose for New Franklin School. And that reaction makes a lot of sense. When projects move into a different scale, it naturally raises questions, not just about the project, but what else might be coming down the road, what could feel surprising in the future, whether the level of clear, thoughtful planning that should underpin investments of this magnitude is really there. I also appreciate the genuine curiosity here, a desire to be responsive to the schools, which I know the council values, while at the same time being mindful of cost, trade-offs, and broader responsibilities to the city. And that tension is healthy, and I know all of us here sit with that tension all the time. Tonight, we're not asking for a decision about anything, of course. It's about transparency. It's about pulling the curtain back on how school facility planning works, how much of it is rooted in preventative maintenance and long-term asset management, and how individual projects fit into a much longer arc of planning that extends well beyond any single CIP cycle. Ken Lynchy, our Director of Building, Grounds, and Maintenance, is here to walk you through how we plan for and manage school facilities over time. His work is grounded in preventative maintenance, system life cycles, long-term asset management, and he brings a deep practical understanding of both the buildings themselves and the trade-offs that we've made over the years in trying to maintain those buildings. Ken will walk you through the facility side of the work, the history behind it, how projects like New Franklin and the Career Technical Education Center fit into a disciplined long-range planning process. Our goal tonight is a shared understanding. If we leave with a clear picture of how we plan, what you can reasonably anticipate, both as a board and as a council, and how we stay aligned as projects evolve, then I think the conversation's done exactly what it was set out to do. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ken Lynchy.
Wherever you're comfortable, Ken.
Thanks, Zach. Thank you, Zach. Good evening, Mayor, City Council, School Board, City Manager. As we go through the presentation, I'm going to give a brief summary. I thought it would be best to kind of go school by school, kind of give you a timeline of where the high school was, go through the middle school, elementaries, and then we'll get into the elementaries as we move through. As you can see with PHS, Portsmouth High School, 1958, We did 3 additions throughout those years with the Knight complex in the middle. We did a major renovation in 2002 to 2005 with a 36 mil with an additional 4.5. Thankful to our career tech at that time, Pam McCartney, was able to recalculate that funding to get us additional funding for free, that 4.5 million. That process also started when we started in 2002. That process roughly starts about 7 years prior. That would then roll into our middle school, built in 1930, 75 edition, where we are now today with a major renovation between 2010 and 2013. Again, that same process starts roughly 5 to 7 years prior to that as well. As we move into the next slide, Little Harbor Elementary, originally construction in 1969, open concept building, no walls throughout pretty much the entire academic side. Over time, slowly they would put up a wall here, put up a wall there, but imagine you going to school back in the 70s and there's no walls for the classrooms, to the hallways, to the science areas, to the amphitheater. When we looked at that, through that process, when I came into facilities in the 90s, we did a window replacement as part of the 2012 central office move to relocate City Hall. Then we expanded to kindergarten to that way, and then we did a full complete renovation 2015 and 16. Again, that process started about 2012, 2013. And I'm going to elaborate more on these elementaries as we get into a further slide. As we get into Dondero, 1973, 75 it burnt down. Mainly the roof and infrastructure came down. We left the concrete walls, rebuilt. In the 90s, we had 2 modulars. I believe they came in 96. We moved 2002. As part of that renovation, we did a renovation in 4 classrooms, which we call the Castle. Some people might understand, Coach Councilor Blaylock shaking his head. As part of that, full renovation 17 and 18, and then we just did the windows and 50% of the siding down 24. And as well as, you know, RJL, Robert J. Lister Academy, established in 1996, was out to Jones Base, out to Pease Air Force Base. We shifted that into Sherman School in 2024, and we were fortunate to move it into community campus with a recent renovation 2 years ago. New Franklin School has warranted its own slide. Construction 1963, flagpole addition in 83. We did have a fire in 85, which we just re-renovated that area. As part of, I believe, the redistricting back in the early 2000s, granted an addition of 4 classrooms and additional cafeteria. At that time, the gymnasium was the cafeteria come 10:30 in the morning. They only had phys ed in the morning. So we were able to flip that cafeteria 180 degrees, given its own space, and allow the gymnasium to be there throughout the day. We looked at energy efficiency upgrades, and like I said, I'll get into more elaborate in the next slide. But we looked at condensing boilers. New Franklin was our model school. We did mechanical upgrades in 2019. It was a perfect timing. That school had no mechanical systems besides some cabinet unit heaters against the wall. When we came out of COVID, that school had full 100% mechanical system, fresh air throughout the building. At that time was also conversations of AC. Then we focused in on adding AC into 22 throughout the school. And again, here we are requesting funding for phase 1, 2, and 3 for the future renovation. So back, as I stated before, if I look at the elementary timelines, we started in 2002 with New Franklin as part of that redistricting, which fell into Dondero a little bit. But we actually sat there with a few school board members of where we are with facilities. So we looked at our facilities with the Doran Whittier. We put out a study. They came back and gave us an idea of where we are, what's the construction cost, what's the renovation cost. As that folded out, central office, as I stated, moved over to City Hall as part of the No Child Left Behind Act. The kindergarten revolved into renovation, but also required us to install a sprinkler system. At that time, we didn't have one. However, the state fire marshal said, you have until 2017 to finish. So that really grounded some of the funding through Mr. Bahinko to allow us to then, where are we going to move with our elementary schools? At that time, that's when we looked at energy-wise, as we move into renovations, where do we want to go energy? Do we want to do condensing boilers, gerotherms, you know, how do we want to move through? So we did another study with EEI, and then we ramped it into New Franklin as a model, and we did about $500,000 or $480,000 there to see how these condensing boilers, DDC controls, refrigeration, thermal insulation, and some other window repairs. We used that model and then turned that into the renovation project for Little Harbor. Again, first renovation since 1969. Fire code requires, that took us 2 summers, 5 million a summer in 9 weeks. Pretty much 18 to 20-hour days in order to flip that area into and be done. We then shifted into New Dondero School, same process. 10 million, 5 million a summer, 9 weeks. If some of you don't recall or don't know, the 5th grade wing had no corridor. The corridor actually went in between the classes. So when I went down that corridor, I'd actually walk in through my class to get to Pip's class, to get to Mrs. Cook's class. So we turned around and looked at that structural wise and created a corridor, which now you see the yellow lockers, that kind of give that transition to middle school as well. But we helped adapt that school to have a better environment for the teachers in the 4th and 5th grade wing. As I stated then we shifted into just before COVID. New Franklin had no mechanical systems. We felt that was the practical renovation to do at that time. Then we shifted into the AC, as that was another conversations. As we knew the capital funding, as renovations for elementary schools were coming, and New Franklin was on the docket, we, as administrators, looked at ESSER funds for the Dondero windows and siding replacement, and here we are with New Franklin request of the 3 and the 5 and the 5. Capital process. As we look at our community and our schools, we know they're long-term. We don't build new schools, we renovate them. You look at the dates we have every 20, 25 years, we look to upgrade our schools. Due to the age, high school's 1956, it's been through 3 little ones, a major one, and a major renovation. Here we are in 2026. So how do we identify our needs? It's through regular building, work orders, staff inputs. You know, do we look at engineers? We look at equipment failures. We look at building age, systems. How do we operate not only as operational, but how do we operate as educational, safety, educational, and efficiencies? Next slide, please. When you take that assessment and you put it in categories, then we start looking at roofs, HVACs, interiors, safeties. I do want to point out in grant funding to date, I've been able to receive from the state $929,046 free from multiple grants, Homeland Security Grant 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we're allowed to put a lot of cameras, access control, and other things throughout our schools at no cost to the taxpayers. And then we look into code compliances, educational needs, and site infrastructure as we categorize our problem. As we move into the CIP slides, this slide has been with us for, in my tenure in facility director, for multiple years. Over the years, that investment has grown. First would be $500,000 about every 3 years. Then it turned into $1 million every 3 years, and then we've kind of grown that in based off the individual needs of smaller capital projects, but not large scale, where we can do multiple things within that time frame. The next slide kind of gives you that idea of whether it's brick repairs, gym floor replacement, refinishing, security. So we kind of give you a broader range to allow us to do smaller project, but then warrant it to be in a capital plan. Most of these projects above 50, as you can see, to 250, 100,000. We try to project out. Yes, there is 1 year open, but that allows us some flexibility, or me some flexibility, depending on how I have to fluctuate, or depending on what project comes in line that we need to adjust to. Next slide, please. This is the elementary slide that we present. This is usually was geared towards the elementary schools. We had Little Harbor, Dondero. As you can see here, this is our FY 27 and 28 request for $5 million each. That last $5 million will then revert back to Dondero. During the ESSER, we are able to use every penny that we can get and get get additional siding, but we weren't able to side the entire place. So we want to revert back to that and just wrap up that siding piece on the back side of the school. There's nothing wrong with it besides showing some age. So we felt that we can hold off for a few years and then we can revert back to that. Next slide, please. Excuse me. As we talked about the elementary schools, this is how we talk about what we propose and phase. When we did the original design back in 2014, meeting with the principals and administrators, we had a design. We had a plan. We had to create a layout of how we want to proceed with the school. As things resolved, programs change, building needs change, support services, case managers, we brought the architect back in also part of the redistricting conversations. And we brought in and said, was this model going to work that we already had planned and ready to move forward with, or was it not going to work? And this is where the adjustment came into play. As you can see, there's 3 phases. First phase is to allow us to get the +1 classroom up in the left. This allows us flexibility to move classrooms around as we work in the building and renovate. Phase 2 gets us into the additions, and we have to get into the additions on the bottom left in the pink and beige, because that allows us to build this centerpiece, which we, oops, sorry, shouldn't touch it, but either way, allows us to build that centerpiece. Forget it's a touchscreen. Allows us to be the centerpiece, and we can bring all the case managers, support services, all of them into one cohorted area where they allow to work together cohesively versus somebody being down and off the cafeteria, somebody being over here by the main office, and somebody's down here as well, or they're working in a hallway. So we've strategically planned this place out and how we can work through, but also try to meet the needs when we're done. And then the last phase falls into cosmetics and some security and pieces as well. A lot of roof replacements. There's some additions, paving. There's a lot of infrastructure upgrades. AC is going to be reused. There's some additional mechanical systems to cover these pieces as well. So it's a well thought out investment for Portsmouth schools in the city of Portsmouth. Playgrounds, as grateful the city council gave us funding to talk about the playgrounds. The process in years past was supported by PTAs. We then brought that in-house in multiple conversations. We are, as you can see in 27 and 28, are the $500,000 for New Franklin and then the $500,000 for Dondero. We are in the midst, if you can jump to the next slide, please. We are in halfway through for Little Harbor. As of today, we are 99.5% done with the plans. We have one little tweak that we'll do on Tuesday. And then as of next Friday, we're 100% is what we call, it's called turn the page, where we've reviewed the entire project where it best meets Dondero's Little Harbor's needs, and PEEP, the early education program. We're also in the middle of permitting right now with wetland and shoreline. Talking with Suzanne Woodland today. We'll get into the permit process, bid process, and getting the bid out shortly. And we'll be moving and breaking ground April break. Now, we already know we got to put a plan in place to where the kids are going to play, how are we going to get them moving, is it the fields across the street, using Cloud Fields a little bit. So we're working on that play. In order to meet the timeline for school of August 21st, 22nd, just before school opens, we have to backtrack a timeline. It's construction. There's site work, there's demo work, there's grading work, there's wetland requirements we have to do. So we're in talks with Aaron Lawson, the principal. So they're working on a plan now, and how are we going to work cohesively to make sure that happens. And we'll be done hopefully April 21st. The CTE slide. This is what we brought to City Council 2 sessions ago. It's to identify that the state we are coming up for state funding in FY 30-31. That this time in the next year or so, we'll be creating an RFQ to look for a qualified architect for services to sit down with staff, our director, superintendent, of where we're going to move, change, adapt to grow our CT program to where it is to move forward, such as we did back in 2002. We also asked for additional funding to start placing in for the mechanical systems. The Career Tech is also not just in the back end of the building, it's spread throughout. So this is hopefully going to allow us to piggyback some of the state funding for the mechanical upgrades that the life expectancy of the high school is starting to reach, built in 2004, to hopefully ease the burden or ease however we can look for state funding or the renovation eventually, as we're going to have to start talking discussions with the superintendent as well, as the high school is reaching its life expectancy on the mechanical systems, life safeties, and then I'll discuss that a little bit more in broader terms in one of the last slides. But we're going to have to start looking at things, just its life expectancy of mechanical systems. But this is what we put in 2 years ago, and now we're adding or starting to put the out years of years. What I want to make a quick note is after this slide, normally in the capital improvement book, I misplaced and didn't put the paving roofing slide in. That slide I added to the capital plan that's not on this piece I believe was warranted to take out of that first slide due to the square footage of the paving, which is just over 900,000, and the roof square footage that we have district-wide is over 500,000. Due to the magnitude, sometimes the flexibility of cost, I felt that it was warranted its own page. I just forgot to put it in this slide, so I want to at least make a comment on that. Next steps in capital improvements. So it kind of gives you a broader page. I have had these identified in a form up in my office, but if you look at each school, I kind of give a broader, some of these are bigger capitals, some of these are little capitals. But when we look at each building as a whole, and we look at the age, we look at the deficiencies, we look at where we are in energy management, we look at usages, it gives you a broader spectrum of what we need coming down the pipe for CIP. You know, sound systems, clocks, the classrooms, we're always cosmetically painting. We have a lot of things, and I'll give a slide shortly coming up. But you can kind of gives you an idea of what's coming down the line for the high school, as I talked about with the CTE FY30, how the RFQ will solicit for an engineer to revisit and envision the needs and design, as we will tie in some of the mechanical systems. We come into the middle school to give you an idea that I also put in here for the windows. The windows that are beautiful in the front white on the side are nice and white. Those are installed in 1986. Now, we've refurbished them. They work, but the question is how many times can we continue to refurbish to at some point we come back in the line and ask for funding to replace those windows, or what is the next step for the facade of that building. We're working on some step replacement this summer, sidewalk restoration this summer. The deterioration between the winters and the salt is really taking a toll. And we look at the upgrades as well throughout the expansions. Next slide, please. Same with Donderos. I talked about the exterior. We'll continue to do roofs, and that's in that slide. We'll start looking at exterior mason, repointing, brick repairs. Same way with Little Harbor. As we revert back out of New Franklin, there's always conversations on how to get a security entrance into Little Harbor. We have a slight plan with the architect now that we're trying to define more based off the building needs. But we'll continue to do that, and then when we feel that we have that solidified, we'll bring that forth as well as into one of the slides. Again, that windows there were 1986. They've been all refurbished. They work well, but those eventually will have time and need replacement. Stage lighting, athletic complex built in 1989. We continue to do irrigation repairs, fencing replacements, soccer field, hockey boards, grass restoration. If you take an area view, look at Google Earth, you can see the wear and tear that our grass fields significantly take. We love our turf field. We use it day in and day out, nightly, weekends. It's been, I believe, the best investment for Portsmouth schools in the city of Portsmouth, even our new one. However, it doesn't have a life expectancy of 10, 12, 13 years, and that's why I did put it in the bottom of the slide, just so that at some point you're going to see that pop back up. Our goal is to get it to at least a 12, 13-year life like we did the last time. In addition to this field that we have, we put the shock pad underneath, which gives that additional cushion to help with the GMAX as well. That's an investment that Portsmouth spent wisely in the first phase, because we can reuse that in the second phase. That's about a $100,000 investment. So that'll get reused as part of that process, and then we'll move on from there. To give you an idea what our summers kind of look like, or what my summer will look like, this is what we're projecting to kind of look like what this summer is for workload. With New Franklin, Little Harbor Playground, there is roofs at both schools going to be happening. As I stated, we're continuing to look at security upgrades. We're looking at a blue light notification. There's a couple other things as well we're doing this summer. The RFP will begin sometime between the summer and the fall. We continue to look at interior upgrades, stairwell treads, carpets are getting replaced again this summer, mechanical upgrades. As we talk about age assessment on equipment, Air Handler 3 lost its cooling coil. We try to do repairs. It's shot between the air movement and the salt water, so that's going to get replaced this summer with some mechanical dampers. Again, athletic complex built in 1989. Slight improvement in 2002, but we're looking to do some further things, and then we have paving as well as PHS. And then this last slide here kind of gives you an idea of what we did this past summer. Not only do we look at, the essential maintenance and safety upgrades, and we support summer programs, but in addition to routine work of custodial, regular maintenance, work orders, mowing fields, painting fields, whatever it may be, this is also what we do as a generic list between each school, between building repairs, capital improvements throughout all our schools, and throughout the summer prioritized through the energy efficiencies and safety improvements as we move through the buildings. And as we get into questions, I got one fact that I'd like to talk about: facilities. Education schools are the second most used facility in the United States besides an airport. If you use the high school as an example, we move roughly 1,000 to 1,200 people a day in that building 6 to 7 times. If you take that 7 times by 5, that's 35,000 feet moving throughout that building. Not counting the weekends, not counting the nights, plays, basketball games, things like that. You take that over 40-week, 44-week, you're looking about 1.4 million plus foot traffic in that building moving through doors, classrooms, bathrooms, life safety, and all that. It takes a lot. It takes a manpower and a team that we have to help maintain and keep that building where we are. Portsmouth Schools has done a great investment in our schools. We hope to continue that investment and continue to make our schools look that they do right now, from 20 years old to 5 years old.
Thank you, Mr. Lynchy. You did forget the tennis courts on there. They were fantastic, but a great job. I know that we threw that over the fence for pickleball requirements, but a great job on that, and really a impressive turnaround on that. But clearly know a lot of information and do a fantastic job. And I would never have thought, although I will dine out now, knowing that they're the second most used building besides airports. That's reasonable, and it could easily, I'm sure they're all as very easy on buildings as my 9-year-old is. I'm sure it just keeps getting easier and easier. But
They're kids.
They're
You know,
kids.
that's what they're there for, and then, and we'll, fix it and maintain it afterwards.
so this was a great overview. I know that this is hopefully the first of a couple of work sessions that we can have this budget cycle. Early in the budget cycle, I'd like to schedule another one. I would like to keep this as possible focused on the facilities. That's what was prepared for this evening, and to focus on the questions that we have around facilities. Obviously, there's a lot of other questions that make up a budget: health insurance, all of those things. We will hopefully have those conversations with you guys. But considering this was in the packet, this was in the noticed. If we can keep the conversation on buildings and facilities and what we're doing to manage the expectations, I think that will serve us well. If it drifts off, we can certainly address that, but want to make sure that we're here to answer the questions that you guys graciously came to prepare to discuss. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions. I don't know how many. It sounds like, Kenny, this is not the first time you've given the presentation to the school board. They've probably heard that, but I will try to kind of go back and forth for questions between the council and the school board, if that's all right. If there's not questions in the school board, we don't have to come up with them just to come up with questions. And likewise for the council. But I'll start off with just opening the floor to any questions after thanking Mr. Lynchy for a great presentation. Councilor Cook.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, School Board Chair, and thank you to the team from the schools department for the presentation. I did ask for this work session, and the reason I did is I wanted to make sure that we were planning adequately for the next 5 years plus. I chair the Municipal Buildings Committee, and we have a major project that's sitting on the docket and that we're trying to plan for, and I don't want to be in a position that we plan something and then we have to neglect the schools.
Sure.
So that's my biggest concern, is making sure that every item that has been addressed here is actually in our CIP budget. And so that's really my biggest question is all the things that you covered, is every single one of them in the CIP budget? In specifically, I believe that there's a school facilities, capital improvements, kind of a generic CIP item. Does that encapsulate all of these improvements beyond the major capital improvements?
Yeah, so So with facilities, you have to look at it two ways. You have to look at, we call low-hanging fruit and big-hanging fruit, depending on where the category that we have. Yes. So we talk periodically, if you go up to my office, I have whiteboards everywhere. They have a lot of these things. Not only we talk about this, but we talk about piping in elementaries. We talk about, this potentially coming down from the state, radon. We're going to be testing for radon, and we look at, so there's a broader range. So then we categorize where does that line fall, and then we look at generically putting that statement into CIP. So it doesn't pinpoint us to one particular piece that we can do. When we talk about athletic complex upgrades, we talk about allows us to do broader repairs, depending on where the funding is of the irrigation or the fencing. Then we also get into facilities. As we talk about, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit of the stairwell treads that we've been doing out of operating. But there comes to a painting when you want to do a larger scale and try to change the aesthetics like we did in the elementaries, then that falls into the CIP. So yeah, we put everything and anything into a category, and then we put it into the CIP plan.
One thing I mentioned just in terms of the planning process for you, that's beyond us, the CTE year is a guess on our part, because the way in which that you basically, we're cycling through all the CTE centers in the state, and the state has a vested interest in maintaining those centers regionally, and so the earliest we think that we would be up is FY30, but it could be 32 because of the biennium, and it depends on who's in front of us, what they do, how many places get funded. So for us, what we will need to do is we will start the work of building towards being prepared building to be ready for FY30 if it happens, knowing we might have to push to 32. But along that route, there's a whole bunch of decision points that are for the board and for the council, where at any point there's off ramps where we could say we're not interested in doing that, or we're interested in doing it in a smaller way. But the way this system works effectively is we have our window, and for the most part, even though it's not formally laid out this way, if we miss our window, we'll see you in 25 years for the next opportunity. So that's and that's a big one. That's a big ticket item for us, obviously, coming down the road.
A follow-up
Yes,
on this?
I have a follow-up specifically on CTE, because that is the next major budgetary item from what I can tell. State funding is challenging right now, and it seems to be getting more and more challenging. Do we have any alternate planning process in place for the case scenario where the state decides not to fund these programs and these improvements?
I think the scale of what we're trying to do would be dependent upon the state continuing. And I think we're in a moment politically where there's not a lot of things that both parties agree on in terms of education. But one is the kind of the school to work pipeline is one that people do. And so regardless of, I think, party, most folks are supportive of career and technical education centers, even folks who are less supportive of other parts of public education. So I think right now we're confident that money will be there and be available for us. But no, I don't think we're not in a position where, the plan B in terms of that funding source is if we, as a school board and a city council and as a community, wanted to take that type of step, and for some reason that money wasn't there, which again I think is going to be, then we would have a really hard conversation about to what extent can our local community absorb those types of costs, or to what extent are we going to significantly scale back the scope of what it is that we would hope for our career and technical education center.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Councilor Cook. Any school board questions? Nancy?
Well, I think one of the things that I'm really afraid of, and some people think I'm crazy for saying this, but I'm worried about the current 2,000 building units that are now being built in Portsmouth and what effect that's going to have on our schools. I know I was part of the joint building committee for the high school in 2006. Our high school is built for 1,500 students, so we've got plenty of room at our high school. Our middle school is just about our middle school has room for more students.
Some additional
So I don't think we have to worry about those two schools. But what I'm worried about is our elementaries. If families move into our community, that is going to affect our elementary schools. And so to answer your question about future building needs, are we gonna need to add on to New Franklin, Little Harbor, Dondero, whatever, to absorb these families? They say that it's only single people and, you know, people that don't have children that are moving in, but we have the Sherburne School project, we have the Christ Church project, we have the Christmas tree project. I can't believe that families aren't going to be moving into Portsmouth. And I could be wrong, and there's no way to substantiate that, but I just warn everybody that I think we could be facing adding on to an elementary school.
Thank you, Nancy, for that. I think it's it's important to remember that in terms of the elementary schools, and I would, maybe it's a question for, or reinforce something that Mr. Lynchy said, in that we renovate and expand. We wouldn't necessarily build another school because of that, but we would expand and take that into account. I think the lesson at the high school, there's room there, and for the middle school, and so monitoring that, you know, closely, and to how quickly we can find out, especially in the Little Harbor neighborhoods, you know, if that is ever going to start filling up faster, that's going to place more pressure. I saw Councilor Tabor, and then Councilor, then we'll go back.
Thanks, Mayor. We not only have to look at what we do in our schools now, but what we're going to be doing in our schools 5 years from now. And one of the big drivers, it seemed to me, of the New Franklin renovation was the space didn't work for the way we do education now. There was not a place for the support staff, for the psychologists, for the paras, you know, and all that support we now give kids. So when you look at our 7 buildings now, are there any other areas that you see the space doesn't work for the way education is moving? So it's more, are there some pain points where program is moving one direction and the space is not keeping up?
I mean, I think it's always wise as you're trying to build, you're trying to future-proof things. I think within the realm of the trends we see now, I think we're comfortable where we are at the moment. But, you know, what was the build date, Kenny, on Little Harbor?
1969.
Right. So in 1969, it seemed like a great idea to have no walls, right? And so when did people start to decide, geez, I don't know that that's the best idea? I think that's hard. So, but I think to answer your question in terms of our current analysis, we don't see trends that we can't, of the things we understand about how, you know, how education is evolving, we don't see things that are in the way of, you know, the next 10 to 15 years of what we're going to be doing. But it's so hard to predict how our field is going to, you know, evolve, and from how is AI going to impact what our instruction looks like, what our day-to-day operations look like. I mean, those are things I think we're still trying to. I think a lot of people are trying to figure out in a lot of different areas. But I would say there's not things we see right now that are a clear block to what we can project out on the horizon. So.
Thanks, Councilor Tabor. And maybe just a quick related follow-up to that. And this is anecdotal, and I'm not an educator, but it does seem as though there's more support within the classrooms now than previously. Is that a trend that we will continue to see kind of rise? Are we flattening out on the support levels? Are we, you know, I guess that's the question. Do we expect that trend to continue up and to the right, or do we think that we've kind of met the moment there and it's about finding the space to work, or do we expect it just to kind of keep going where the ratios of adults to children in the classroom grows?
So I think the trend, even outside of Portsmouth, I mean, just in general in
Sure,
education,
more
is
general.
more and more people seeking opportunities for individualized opportunities for their students, and looking at, you know, the legal structures that give them an opportunity to do that. And so, you know, I think when you think about New Franklin, and Kenny was speaking to this, a lot of the work in New Franklin is around taking that what is the library space now and really trying to rework several different things so that, and I know a lot of the council really appreciated folks who came out, whether it was during redistricting or during this tour that we did. When you saw the other schools, you saw what like Dundero looked like with the nice spaces that were for small groups or individualized instruction. That didn't exist in New Franklin, and part of what we're trying to reproduce is that. So to answer your question, I think that trend, we'll see if that trend subsides, but I think that trend has been the movement nationally is more towards those types of things as people become more savvier about how to navigate those systems.
Okay. Back to the school board, but I'm just going to break my rule that I set out at the beginning first. I think it would be helpful as you're talking about, as we talk about capital programs together, if, Dondero and New Franklin are different and we have to put more either paraprofessionals or educators in the classroom because there's not a centralized way to take advantage of that and kind of make them more effective. Do not know if that's true, but if there's a way to look at the improvements that we make in terms of having an efficiency for our educational process and delivering to the students in terms of outcomes and tests a higher level, potentially with less people because they are arranged in the school in a better way. That would go a long way in terms of our kind of long-term planning, in terms of balancing operating and capital costs to invest in those things faster if it means that we can, I guess, stem that growth a little bit. Lisa,
I wonder if I might speak to that just briefly as an example. I think where we have more space, particularly in the high school, there have been a lot of creative changes. Oh, sorry. There have been a lot of creative changes in the use of space at the high school where we do have more room in the physical facility. So for example, we redid the 9th grade social studies curriculum. So it's kind of a maker space combined with looking at UN global sustainability goals, and they have 3 groups of kids in 3 different classrooms, and they move through that space in small groups. So in New Franklin, we don't have the space and the physical plant to reimagine how we can accommodate kids, but in the high school, we definitely do, and we're doing that in a lot of ways. So I think it's a fair question, and I think when we have more room to maneuver literally, it's much easier to reimagine things and future-proof it as we re-envision how we want to educate kids. So I just wanted to add that. Thank you.
That will count as the school board's question. I guess that was more of a statement.
Sorry,
and I made
Byron.
like 3, so. Byron, did you have a question? Okay, Councilor Bagley.
Thank you, Your Honor. With the latest data, we're at $27,600 roughly cost per pupil, which is above the state average of $22,700, and it's quite a bit above comparable communities. A lot of the really small communities, their cost per pupil is high because they don't have economies of scale. How are we capturing your costs so that we are ensuring that the tuition-ridden kids from outlying communities are paying their fair share?
Brian?
So I think so our area agreement with Newcastle, with all the SAU 50 communities, Newcastle, Greenland, Newington, and Rye, spells originally passed in 71, 72, and then there are clarifying agreements, 4 different clarifying agreements in between, spells out exactly what those communities contribute to and don't. But for the most part, most of what it is we effectively take our cost to run the entire high school and then do a per head count and then distribute it out to SAU 50 communities with some exceptions around some special ed costs and out of district special ed costs for SAU 50. SAU 50 covers those costs themselves for their students. But there's some nuance to it, and I don't have the entire list in front of me, but definitely something we can come back to the council with to be like, to show you the actual agreement. Here is the latest version of those things. But I don't think that I don't know. I think it's better for me to return at a future date and be able to show you exactly what goes into that, the overall number that we then create and break out and give out to people in SU 50. Sorry.
Yeah, because I have serious concerns that the Portsmouth taxpayers are paying for these costs, and that burden is not shared by other people using our schools. And I want to see the data that shows that that's not the case.
Sure.
Thank you, Counselor Bagley. You want to jump in, Nathan?
I just feel like I should,
On the numbers?
yeah, I just want to say out loud, just because I don't want folks to walk away with a sense that the capital investment is really missing. There is a capital investment component that makes back a piece of that. I think that the superintendent, they can bring that back, but there is an element of the area agreement that speaks to the capital costs at the high school. To the extent that we bring in students on an elementary or middle school basis and they pay a rate, those rates aren't baked with any capital component, but the high school one that we have in the area agreement is. And you'll see that when you see some more of the data, but I just didn't want anybody to walk away thinking that it's absent, because it's there.
And just in terms of the numbers, going on the Josiah Bartlett Institute, which is not necessarily a left-leaning think tank, they pegged that on a state average of 26,000 and a half or so, roughly there. So we're still in line in that, but I think having that understanding and that conversation would be helpful to know where we are based on that. And that a lot of that is declining populations, that all of a sudden we have fixed costs and it pushes up the average cost. Going back to the school, is there anybody on the school board before we go to Counselor Hopkins? Okay, Counselor Hopkins.
Thank you, Mayor. As in regards to, the facilities not having enough space for students, from my understanding, which correct me if I'm wrong, Little Harbor has had decreased enrollment, New Franklin and Dondero are kind of bursting at the seams. And then how did redistricting play into all of this, and what are the projected numbers, redistricting in the future? I'm not really sure. I was left a little bit unclear as to how redistricting was enforced and where we stand with that and how that will affect things going forward when we're looking at space constraints for students and staff.
I'll let school
I
board
was
member
just
Maddow,
taking this.
whose hands have been all over this, answer that question.
I think so. I think the short answer to that is if you took the blocks of neighborhoods that we sought to move, one block of neighborhood from New Franklin, 2 blocks from Dondero to Little Harbor, and you took all of the students that were in those blocks and then you moved them over in 1 year, then it would essentially, I say, fill up Little Harbor in terms of the number of classrooms. I think it was 23 number of classrooms that we projected with the current enrollment. Through the redistricting process, however, it became apparent that the community was had serious trepidations about being forced to move schools. So we built in a transition model that would allow for essentially grandfathering of students. And there's a report, happy to send you the report, that shows the trend lines over the next 5, 6, 7 years to get to that point where the schools are rebalanced. The downside of that, of course, is in the short term, it doesn't feel like the problem is like served overnight. However, it was a balance of community input and those families and sort of where we get to in those years based on the projections we had previously.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I just add something to that? We recently voted to have the new WHEB complex go to Little Harbor. That should go to Dondero. But the board voted with those, I forget how many apartments it is, 350 or something.
Yeah.
Students from that, what is
Less
it?
Less than 100.
Oh, okay. Those students will not go to Dondero, they will go to Little Harbor. So we're always, and with Byron's help, we're always looking at the new developments to see if we can put them in a different school.
Yeah, and I think it's an interest, just as like maybe a commentary on when you get into individual class sizes at the different schools, and like hyper-focusing on a class of 12 in one school or a class of 20 or in another, and trying to over-optimize by moving neighborhoods and not understanding like where bubbles are and those things go through the system. So I think that one of the learnings that we had from the process was to not try and micromanage specific, like perfect equal distribution, and understand that there's going to be differences across the different schools just by the nature of population.
Any other questions? I guess I have one. Kenny, you've been standing up there, great. Counselor Cook, but I think it would be helpful when we have it in the CIP, and we kind of get it in the CIP, and that goes through your process. Unfortunately, we have to weigh it against like all of the projects within the city, and that's where it gets difficult. And I want to say that because I don't think it necessarily gets worse for the school department if we see a greater ability to impact, citizens of Portsmouth, albeit they're 18 and under, with investments that we make. We can be talking about the capital improvement plan in a different way, but we need to see this is scheduled here, and it's a much more critical, and this would be the impact to. I know that we have in the CIP pages, but to be able to write that out a little bit more and to have a collaborative conversation as we're doing now for, potentially this year's CIP, but to understand what that impact is so that we're able to balance that impact against things that we could or otherwise not do on the city side if we think that there's a better way to serve our residents, our kids, our parents, if we saw that information. Councilor Cook.
Thank you, Your Honor. I always have lots of questions, sorry. I think one of the reasons that the New Franklin project was a surprise this year is that usually in our CIP items for larger projects, we have a budget for design that comes a year or two in advance. And we didn't have that element sheet that had design in it, so we didn't anticipate that the program was coming. And I know you mentioned that we'll be issuing an RFP soon for the CTE program for design, but that's not in the element sheet. And even if it's coming out of your general fund budget, one of the things that I think would be helpful for me is to have it included, have that funding, projected funding included, because then we can anticipate better. Yep. And so I'm asking kind of, what are the other things that maybe we're not seeing here that you're doing? Like when the police or the fire department, when they have to replace vehicles, that goes in the CIP budget. So we'll see it and we'll see kind of which part of the budget it's coming out of. So vehicle replacement, I know the schools
we have that as well. It's a rolling stock.
Yeah, so just making sure that we have rolling stock included, small repairs that maybe don't seem as critical, but maybe aren't included here because they're coming out of operating budget. So that's kind of where I would like to maybe see a little bit more, so that way when we're planning, we're not overlooking those things. And I think it's also incredibly helpful because the budgets are getting really tight. Operating budgets are going to be really tough this year. And so I like to think that we're looking at the CIP really carefully as a tool because of our AAA bond rating, a tool to finance projects that we can finance over time and have less of an impact on the operating budget. So it's more of a statement than anything.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I mean, we do look long-term capital, rolling stock. And I did mention earlier, and I thought Mr. Tabor would kind of comment on energy, but when we look at all our projects as well, we do a full energy analysis of LEDs, condensing boilers. How do we reduce our carbon footprint? How do we reducing our energy as well? The city just did a study. Peter Rice did one, I believe, about a year ago. We piggybacked that. We have a new updated report on what the high school potentially can move down to, and then also what the middle school. Those are the tour schools that don't have as much LED, and then we'll look at rebates coming down the line from Eversource or Unitil as well. So we want to, as managers or directors, we want to make sure that when we do a project, as someone as I talked to about Homeland Security, is we don't miss any unturned stone for grant funding, free money, whether it's local, state, Washington, D.C. as well. So we want to make sure that we're as efficient as we can for this project. But we can look at that data and try to broaden that out as well.
And I would just say, I mean, I think as we've worked through, thinking about what we're putting in the CIP, and when we're thinking about what is hitting those dollar amounts that, we're getting in that $50,000 range of projects, and I think we try to articulate those things when they come. I think one of the places where it's a little bit different is in that role, kind of that annual, the first of our, is it the first?
First slide.
The
yeah.
first slide. And sometimes that can be lots of different things that might be smaller that live in there, but we're always open to being as transparent as we possibly can. So.
I guess I can ask one more.
Counselor Cook?
I'm going to ask the elephant in the room question. We're making major improvements to New Franklin School, which are definitively needed. But there's always this question about the location of New Franklin being extremely difficult, surrounded by highways, noise that we cannot address very easily, that the state is not going to address. Has there been discussion about expanding Little Harbor and Dondero instead to take on the student population because New Franklin is so challenging of an environment?
Kenny, I can start. If the direction, if we were to make that change, we assume that would not happen at Little Harbor because there's too many environmental issues, there's too much regulation, too close to the water. And if we were going to if it was going to be like some type of major addition, conceptually, it makes sense that Dondero would be where some significant, it would be the first place we would look. But that is what I would say. I don't know. There's not been a significant costing out of that scenario, but when we talk about it, that's been a discussion. It wouldn't be Little Harbor. Little Harbor would probably stay exactly the way it is, and then Dondero would be the place.
School Board Member Maddow.
Thank you. I think it's an interesting. Just one anecdote from the redistricting process was that general concept. I think was something that there was some casual conversations with community members about like that being a potential future, and something that I think folks who are in New Franklin, have kids in New Franklin know, and then I learned was like the deep sense of pride in the neighborhood school at that location. And I just wonder, I definitely, the assumptions around noise and location being difficult, I think are real from the outside. But I don't know that that's felt necessarily on the inside at that location. So I think it would be an interesting conversation with the community because I think it would be a larger investment, knowing nothing about that kind of or speculative on like what that would look like now. I think it would be a much larger investment that we're looking at now, and you have to weigh that against ultimately, I think the kind of community support for doing that is my take. Yeah.
It seems not, and I'm somewhat biased on New Franklin. It would be very interesting to see if building an entirely new, facility for cost per square foot would, we would be making up money on demoing what we have at New Franklin. That seems like in order to get to that place, it would be significant cost savings that we're talking about reducing the amount of teachers and expanding classroom sizes much larger than we have right now. I'd also think that, and I'm trying to be as unbiased as I can as somebody that is tied to the New Franklin School. But one question that I wanted to get to in terms of facilities, as Councillor Hopkins, and it had been a conversation that we'd had previously on the council after MC3, but how do we activate and use our schools in partnership with, if the city is the go-to for childcare opportunities outside, and we are the ones that are working with our Seacoast Community Schools, because we understand that we can't crowd them out, that we need them in terms of the the very small toddlers, but looking at our facilities that I know are, I'm not talking about making them used to the point of airports, but in terms of before school and after school, the fact that we have 3 separate elementary schools that is close to many different folks seems like a positive in terms of transportation when it comes to, you know, picking up your kids after. Would just like to continue that conversation as we get further down, as we look at these capital assets as city assets that are used by the school, and if there's a possibility to use them more to bring more benefit through partnering with, you know, the private sector in terms of childcare, as well as, you know, potential funding that would expand the opportunity that we see there. Just, you know, putting that out there. But that's part of the reason why we want to have this conversation, is look at the assets that we have and how do we best utilize those assets going forward. Pip, or School Board Member Clues.
Thank you. I just wanted to expand a little bit on what Byron said, because not only is there a great amount of pride in New Franklin School, but one of the things, and we have actually opened this conversation several times over the years about consolidating the elementaries, and one of the things we hear repeatedly from the community is how important their neighborhood schools are to them, and it's in fact a reason that many people move to the city, because they can have a neighborhood, many of them walk and ride bikes, and that seems to be really valued by the students and the families. So I do think you actually didn't propose, but you offered that as an option, and it got it got very negative feedback from the community right away. So it is a conversation that we've considered, and I think it would be wise to look at the financial impact, but I think it would have an impact on our community that would be not what we were looking for.
Stephen.
I just wanted to say that Portsmouth schools have performed very well, and I suspect that part of the reason for that is the small neighborhood schools do make them able to be very effective, and that larger schools are more difficult to run, and you may not have the same level of achievement.
Councilor Moreau.
I'm wondering, in your conversations around the energy efficiencies, we've gotten letters from a classroom of 8th graders every year talking a lot about the different ways some of our public buildings and a lot of the schools could be used for solar. So I'm wondering if you have explored any of those as a way, long-term, as we're thinking budgeting, how we could actually reduce utilities.
Yes, so middle school, for instance, has a solar reheat hot water system on the roof. It reduces probably 40% of our hot water heat usage, our energy cost. Dondero and New Franklin have educational solar purposes up there. So they have a 42 kVA panel up there so they can actually see the energy and growth. And as part of the high school, we have two systems. We have a library has a 42 panel system that they did as an educational purpose. However, we also piggybacked in 2015 as part of 2016, a grant that Merrimack backed out. We jumped in with the water department as well and did Manbury Treatment Plant, where we have a 262 panel KVA system on top of the high school now. It's in a PPA agreement that we don't own, but I believe in the next year or so, based off the contract, Peter Rice and I have been talking about it, where we almost have the right to buy that contract out so we can then incorporate those energy savings within us. So yes, we look at solar. We also, when we look at solar, we can't look at newer construction. We have to look at the older construction of the buildings. As an instance for the high school, like the 1956, 1960s, they were built for snow load. Now, we don't see that snow load. Yes, we have a kind of an odd, significant load of snow outside right now, but we also have to look at how we can structurally support that added weight on top of the snow. In the instance of 2015, we had that crazy January where we spent roughly just under $60,000 shoveling school roofs as the second floor above the library did not see out their windows due to a 12-foot snowdrift. So we do look at solar, we look at our options, and we also have to look at what we have for rooftop space versus taking up ground space.
Thank you, I had no idea.
Dr. McLaughlin.
I have that information for Councilor Bagley, and I just wondered if it was all right if I just kind of plug in that on the SAU 50 agreement.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So in that agreement, they pay the current costs, current expenses of the operation for grades 9 through 12. So that includes instruction, so it's teachers, instructional materials, administration, student support services, health services, operation of the physical plant and maintenance of the physical plant is part of our costs. Central services are some of our costs that we price out for district level services. Student activities, teacher retirement, FICA, insurance, all that stuff is built into our overall operational costs. They pay the students who are on IEPs that are at the building. We have we look at the overall cost of all students, including that. So our students are on IEPs, their students are on IEPs, and then we come to an ADM, the number of, the average daily count of people in the building, and we divide it and put it out. Oh, there's also we also charge a 2% rental fee for students from those communities on the depreciated value of the land, the buildings, and the equipment, the long-standing equipment at the high school. So it is built in as part of their agreement, part of the tuition that they pay. That is not something that those communities get for the maintenance and operation of the buildings. Is not something that those communities receive for free.
All right. Would it be possible to get a copy of that?
Yep, absolutely.
spreadsheet?
Definitely
And
send
did
it along.
that include, I didn't catch the carrying cost of the bonded money?
I'll give you the most up-to-date version, and I can't answer that question right now.
Thank you.
I think, obviously, you guys are working hard on area agreements, what that could mean with open enrollment coming to the state of New Hampshire, at least, passing through the Senate. That would be something that there's a lot of people with a lot of questions on that. A lot of people are incredibly concerned. It would be great not only to have that presentation amongst the school board once you make a decision on the path that you will take, but we would love, Dr. McLaughlin, if you could present that to the city council as well. I don't want to put too much work. We might just watch if it's going to be a school board meeting, but we want to make sure that everybody knows as much about that as possible and the potential implications for that.
Yeah, we can do some more work. I will say the school board took a position at our last meeting in relation to that. I don't know if you want to speak to.
So we have been in conversation with school boards around the state who are almost universally opposed to this, just for the potential to induce chaos, for lack of a better word, into our enrollment, budgeting, programming, because essentially we have the fixed costs, we have a certain number of teachers, and there's nothing in this legislation that lets us have any predictability. There's no caps on when students might elect to go to a different district, how long they have to stay, what happens if they come back, how we pay for busing, how we handle special education students. I mean, there's just so many unknowns and black holes, it's almost impossible to list them. So we took a vote as a board unanimously to oppose it and advocate against it in Concord in the current form, along with most other school districts in the state. I think it's been signed now by over 500 school board members and superintendents from all around New Hampshire. So we'll see. But
Certainly excited to hear the advocacy. If it were to pass, is there anything that we need to do in advance of it passing in terms of policies, restrictions that we would need to take under advisement before? And again, I'm breaking the rules. This is I'm tying it back in terms of buildings, but in terms of building space, is there anything that we need to, or the school department or the city needs to proactively do in terms of if it were to?
Do you want to go? No.
I would say yes, and we're still trying to get our arms around it.
Okay.
Some districts are having very preliminary conversations right now about whether we might band together with other schools in the region to adopt a certain approach to this that might protect our predictability and enrollment, but that's not a conversation that we've had as a board or as a community. There are some districts that are looking at, for example, setting the number of students they will accept and the number of students they will allow to leave at 0, which would hypothetically neutralize this, but that's not a conversation that we've had. We're also not clear legally whether the
Seems like it will
legislation
be defined
in its
through a
final
lawsuit.
form will allow that approach. So we're having conversations in our policy committee, and it's something that we're going to need to figure out because it might be with us by July.
And I think the inability to predict exactly the form that it would come in could have issues. The big one for us, one of the big ones for us in terms of our greater school community, could be that we have existing area agreement with SU 50, where they're gonna pay 100% of the costs per head that we just talked about, where potentially, depending on the version of the bill, citizens from any community could send a kid to us for 80%. Our agreements with those communities are binding without a vote of each of the different communities to end the agreement. So then do we end up charging SEU 50 families more than we're charging other families coming in to our system from somewhere else? And/or do those families have the opportunity to say, well, as a citizen, I'm choosing to send my kid there, not through the area agreement, but through this other mechanism, and the state can't explain right now how those things work together. So, that's concerning for us, it's concerning for SEU 50, and to try to map out those types of things when the state hasn't done the work to understand what the ripple effect is of this potential move is challenging. So.
And to circle back to Councillor Bagley's question on tuition, the last version of this bill that I saw would mean that the sending district is paying their per pupil costs. So if you have your fixed costs stay the same and you lose 20 kids, your cost per pupil goes up. So that can start to very quickly be a death spiral for whichever schools start to lose students. So it's a bit of a mess.
All right, we went far afield. It was my fault. Any other questions while we have the school board here? Hey, Brian, or school board member French.
I'll stay on task if you want. But yeah, just I think another thing that maybe not all the counselors know, but we do track projected enrollment data through NASDAQ. And every year that we've been looking at it has been basically creeping down a little bit. But for the first time, it's actually leveled out. So the projections are flat for the next 10 years. So, and that's not taking into account all the building that's going on, but it's based around births. So, and it's been traditionally correct. So at the very least, I do think at least our population, when we talk about our buildings, the enrollment data projected is flat. So I just want to let everybody know that one.
Thanks, Brian. Nancy.
I've been around for a long time, but I remember when we did the renovation at the high school, the state building aid was, I can't remember the percentage, but then when we did middle school, the state building aid was there. So, and again, I can't remember what the percentage was, but there was state money to help with the renovations of those schools. You all know what the state building aid is now, a big fat zero. So just to give you some history of what it was like when we had some money coming in from the state.
School board member Matta.
Thank you. Coming back maybe to a little bit on the framing of the work session, which is sort of getting a better understanding and transparency around CIP projects in the school. I think something that I struggle with is the presentations are good, and like in the moment, I think it's a good representation of where we are with projects. I think just a gentle nudge, I think, on like a more live, sort of living source of truth on the projects that are going on at the school, so, or in the school department. So us at the school board level, the counselors as well, and just the general public can maybe have a more active way to understand the current progress of those things, even at a high level.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and maybe in terms of project page, I don't know if there are project pages, but we have that for infrastructure projects to have. That might be helpful. And again, there's always a focus on delivering as efficient as we can in terms of the capital. I think the capital projects, there is we are now in, a 3% inflation rolling COLA that's looking back, which is different than what we had, for the first, if we look at the last 10 years, we've grown at 4% in terms of our overall budget year after year averaged out. But for the first 6 of those years, it was about actual above inflation by about 1%. Now for the last 4 years, we're about 0.25% below inflation. And so it's still the same increase. And so we need to have as much efficiencies as we can, and especially when it comes to capital projects, to be able to know where we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck. And I mean that as you know, not just as a parent, you know, thinking about the investments that we make in our education, but it's half of the, you know, it's half of the budget. And so if we can be as efficient as possible with that, it might mean crowding out some of the other things that we would like to do but can't afford to do on the city side. And so that's why, you know, collaboration isn't simply about saying, guys, got to do a better job telling us what's going on. It's to try to figure out collectively for the city, how are we meeting that moment better for more people, knowing that we value education in this community, and we also value doing things ahead of the times that they are actually critical falling down. Like, we really don't want things to get pushed off, and that's the luxury that we've had of the councils and school boards that have come before us. So we've made investments at a time when it was more cost effective to do so than, you know, as a Band-Aid, you know, and less disruptive. My sister was at the middle school in one of those renovations, and they just went half the year, you know, because they didn't have, like, it wasn't the summertime that just said, all right, you got half a school year here. And so I know that that's, you know, obviously we gotta meet the moment a little better than that, and that's what the genesis of this conversation is. Councilor Cook.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I want to follow up to what I asked about New Franklin School. That's really what started my whole questioning about process and CIP budget on this. And part of the reasoning is the location of New Franklin being difficult. And we're going through an extensive process at the city to try to make decisions about the municipal building project. And we looked at other sites for a potential police facility. I just want to make sure that we're doing all that due diligence on the school side as well. You know, have we talked about potential, I hate to even say this out loud, other sites for New Franklin School? You know, before we invest a huge amount of money in New Franklin, there's some lovely fields behind the Rite Aid on Woodbury Avenue, which we talked about for a municipal building project that is just down the road from New Franklin School, that's not surrounded by highways. And, you know, did we look at all the possibilities? Because when we're making these kinds of investments, we want them to be long-term investments in our schools, and we want what's best for the students. So that's really why I asked that question. I want to make sure that when we are planning, we're making a strong effort to do what's best in the long run, not putting Band-Aids on things, because that's all we can afford right now.
Thank you, Councilor Cook.
Just to answer that question, I mean, we have not, I think Kenny talked, I think the way Kenny talked about it before, I think he said, you know, we build 100-year buildings because of the cost, so we just keep renovating. So I think our assumption has been that since I've been here, I don't know what the conversation was before me, is that the cost of building a new school is so prohibitive that it would not be, you know, the cost of the taxpayer would be exorbitant and not something that people would be looking to do. So we haven't had that. There's been no New Franklin School conversation since I've been around. So
I mean, middle school we did. In middle school we explored a lot of different, whether it's the ash dump off Jones Ave. I think there's some property out towards Unitil or Eversource all the way up back on the Gaza. So we did look at that broadening piece. However, when you get back into the neighborhood school piece, you look in renovation costs versus construction costs. Yes, we're asking for 13 million now plus the other 5 or so we put in. A new education elementary school right now is going to process roughly probably $60,000 to $75,000. Just because of the market value coming out of COVID, the cost of construction, as you're going to see, as you said, you're looking at the City Hall municipality complex, it's just gonna skyrocket. So as right now, we believe.
You mean 60 to 70 million, right?
Million, sorry, yes, million, sorry.
60 to 70,000, we're in.
Yeah, we're in.
I'll do that deal today, Kenny.
Sorry, million, but. That's what I was saying. But being said that, this is where we believe it's the best bang for the city.
75,000, I'll buy it
Sorry,
today.
it's been a long day, long week.
Councilor Blaylock.
Thank you, Your Honor. I attended Dondero School, but so I'm not as biased towards New Franklin. However, I do live in a New Franklin neighborhood, and my neighbors are all very proud to bring their kids to New Franklin School. I've also learned, after 4 years being on the HGC, that new construction always costs more than an addition or renovation. You know, you got bones, you got something to work with. So whenever you start from scratch, it's going to be more expensive. But I think that this pride of the New England parents and students. I know the mayor attended New Franklin, but I think that would that pride's very strong.
But that aside, I guess, like, you know, I try to be as objective as possible. If there were numbers, I would be hesitant to understand what those numbers would be for an entirely new construction build versus expanding this out when, you know, in terms of the folks that are in there, you know, the highway noise sucks, but we have, or is not ideal. But in terms of the HVAC changes that were made, allows, you know, you don't have to open the windows as much to cool it or to heat it, or to, when it's heated, to let it out, you know, like, so there's been some significant improvements there. But just from a dollars and cents standpoint, you know, if there was rough math on that you could share, but the 65 to 75 million is, I think it's difficult to do something that is right now looked at as, you know, a lot of people, including myself, love it. But if we, you know, have to look at everything, we will, but that's not something at the moment that I see as a huge priority. And I know that it's going to be, it would be a difficult conversation at best to have that conversation, and I think it could distract from the other things that we need to get done as you know, as the city, as a school board, that are certainly higher, that might have a generally higher impact for less disruption in terms of what your meetings would be, and then our meetings after that. Any other questions? We have public comment, so we can get to that if there's none. All right, we'll open up. Thank you again, Ken. That was great.
Thanks, Kenny.
Thank you, Kenny.
Anybody rising for public comment? I don't see where the Zoom is. Seeing none on Zoom. I was like looking at Chair Rappaport. I was like, oh, I look at, there's no Zoom on there. Okay, well, I think that this was there's a lot in the capital stuff. Obviously, we scheduled this before knowing about some of the healthcare costs that we're running into, operating budgets. I know that you guys are far along in your budget. Would like to have this conversation, you know, in terms of operating costs again, and to share it as collaboratively, I think, as the tone was here, to try to find, you know, the solutions that we need, knowing that it's a difficult, you know, situation that we face because of things that, you know, while unanticipated, not in our control at the moment, we're still going to have to deal with them. So hopefully this is a good first step in terms of understanding this and our desire to better understand this long term, and then be able to, with that information, incorporate it better into our capital plan. So it's not just, hey, you know, as we did with the playgrounds, there was a groundswell for that. We saw there was a way to include those in terms of, you know, the city's capital plan. Want to take that same approach when it comes to our building facilities, and again, understand how do we use those assets as best we can throughout the entire city. But with that, I just want to thank you for being here this evening, and for the questions, and for the preparation in this. It really was helpful to see all of that, and well overdue in terms of our ask to you. So thank you, Councilor Cook, for putting that out there. I think it's valuable. All right. We don't actually have to motion or anything, so we'll just, good night, Portsmouth.